These are incredible, incredible thought leaders in various different disciplines, and they have come together in the spirit of a lot of what was talked about earlier today in terms of bringing different, getting multiple disciplinaries and bringing it into the classroom, beta testing it, and getting it out to as many kids as possible. So that's what we're excited to talk to you about today. And yes, I'm Katrina Maestri. I'm on the advisory board of the UCSF Dyslexia Center, and I'm also the president of the board of Chartwell School, which is passionate about taking what we're learning together with UCSF and bringing it into as many kids as possible. I'm also the parent of 2 struggling learners who have needed the services of both of these organizations desperately. And that's how I came to know them so well. And I should also say that I now have a mom being seen at the Memory and Aging Center, which really brings home how connected this neuroscience is on both ends of the life spectrum. And one of the things Bruce was talking about in terms of the NIH's investment in the memory and aging, which is wonderful. It's really striking how little they're giving at the other end of the lifespan to this neuroscience. So we need to work on that because it is very synergistic. So over the years that Chartwell and UCSF have had a partnership, I've gotten to see both organizations grow and expand and the partnership deepen. And one of the most exciting developments that is, to me, is the outreach that's happening with public schools. And that's really the focus of this conversation today. We're going to give you a setup of how it works between UCSF and specialty schools, but then how it is going into a public school with a very, very strong leader that you're about to meet. And I think, right now, it's just incredible how many kids need this and how we're leaving most of them behind. And I find it particularly ironic in California where, as Toby was saying, a lot of our economy is based on these mines. And so what we're letting happen is not just unethical, it's also not good for our economy, not good for our society. So what we're doing right now is taking all of that passion that's shared across this room and trying to make it work. And it only works if you're on the same team, if you have a lot of trust, and if you're collaborating on figuring it out. So what do we have? Do we have another chart up yet? Oh, okay, so the first thing, let me get this in sync. The first thing I want to talk about is UCSF. You've heard a bit about that from Bruce, and you'll hear a little bit more about it from Dr. Christa Watson-Pereira. But the Dyslexia Center provides insight to parents and teachers really about the biological reasons for what they're seeing as struggles. It's a very different perspective to be able to look inside the brain and understand what's happening rather than just looking at the output, like the behavior or the learning. It's better to be focused on the whys than on trying to fix the outcomes. And it has very important implications for both teachers and parents when you know why a child's behaving the way they are. Bruce talked about the phenotyping. Christa's going to talk about that as well, because to be able to really precisely target whatever kind of interventions or help you want to give really depends on that. So Dr. Christa Watson-Pereira is representing UCSF today. She's a master neuropsychologist, both a researcher and a clinician, and has seen all kinds of kids coming through the center. I would imagine she's the most experienced in the field in terms of matching different learning profiles with teaching methodologies. It's very impressive. And so, okay. So the next, the way that Christa's doing that is working really closely with specialty schools like Chartwell. And so that's where Jodi comes in. Jodi Amaditz is a strong leader at Chartwell. She's the director of the lower and middle school, and she also leads the Chartwell partnership with UCSF to help Christa from the pedagogy side understand how to match the instruction with what Christa is showing us in terms of the inside of our kids. And so when that insight's paired with a school like Chartwell that can modify the instruction, teachers and parents experience, really a transformation in their students' learning experiences. And so the first thing that happens when you see that transformation, of course, is that you really want every kid to have it. Every kid deserves it. So what we have on this chart here is just showing that there's a two-way collaboration between UCSF and Chartwell in order to do that. So as soon as you've got the urge for every kid to have it, then, this is strange. Okay, so then Jodi has really spearheaded the growth of the Teacher Training Institute at Chartwell to take all of this neuroscience and some very high quality literacy instruction and take that into the public schools. And Lilia Espinoza today is our example of that. She's been a key partner for Jodi. They really are a true collaboration. Lilia is a principal at RO Hardin, which is a elementary school in the Hollister School District, a struggling school, has a lot of challenges. And Lilia took it upon herself to actually come and do the training herself as a principal, and came back and thought, this, so many of our kids need this. She took some other teachers with her. They all decided this needs to be done in the general classroom. And that's where the partnership really came together. Jodi has gone in and modeled teaching and coach teaching. There's been a lot of practical exposure, but trying to get this to work in a public school is very different, as you can imagine, than having it work in a school that has the luxury of very small class sizes. So we're super excited for you to hear how Lilia is making that happen, because Lilia and Jodi have been working on this for about 2.5 years, maybe a little bit more, and Lilia's already seeing some notable benefits in her classroom. And you think about that in this perspective that most of that time has been during COVID on Zoom. So that's, it's really, we couldn't be more excited about it. So then recently, I'm sure many of you have heard about the UCSF Screener, multitudes, that is taking a lot of the science that's known about what is impacting these reading struggles, putting it into an app-based, gamified screener that will help scale up the ability to see these different cognitive functions and their implications, and whether this is putting a child at risk for reading. And so that Lilia has volunteered one of the initial schools to help validate that screener, and we've also got some examples of how even though this screener is just in the validation stage, it's not meant to be doing what it will ultimately do, but even in this early stage, it's starting to give us inclinations of where we might want to recalibrate teaching. And Jodi and Lilia have looked at that example pretty clearly. So, and of course, why we're doing this is because we want to improve literacy outcomes for all the kids. And I know this is a conference with a lot of people here from the mental health, concerned about mental health, and I think you're going to see throughout this presentation that there is a profound connection between being successful in your classroom and learning to read and having a better mental health outcome. It's probably as important as the therapy and mindfulness and all of that, so keep that in mind when you're looking at it, okay? And so now I will let these fabulous women tell their story.
Thank you, Katrina.
Hi, good morning. I'm very excited to be here. I think probably most people in the room have met Elizabeth Estes because she is quite good at at advocating for breaking barriers, and I think it's amazing because I think it's really important. And so I am very excited to be here today and to share this moment with you, and I hope that this will be the beginning of a revolution.
Yes.
So I'm going to start with a little history lesson. The history of reading. We actually haven't been reading for very long. The human brain in its modern form evolved about 100,000 years ago, and reading is only 6,000 years old. So our brains didn't evolve naturally to be expert readers. And really, when reading became important is when we first had industrialization, and people needed to read the technical manuals to run the machines. And then schools said, oh, we better teach kids how to do this because they need it for their jobs. And the first reports of dyslexia coincide with this in the late 1870s. So again, like when they talked about the transition from the one-room schoolhouse to the 633, this is all happening around the same time. And the first descriptions actually started with strokes, where people lost the ability to read. But then there came some developmental cases where the neurologist said, this is congenital, this is not somebody putting on a show to get out of doing something they don't want to do. This is biological, this is in the brain, and it's very difficult for them. This case report is from 1896. It's Percy F., and it still relates to what we're talking about today. His description is beautiful. If you read it, you'll see some of your students and what he describes, and it's still very relevant to how we think about and consider interventions for dyslexia. I want to go over some definitions just to make sure we're all on the same page. So when I talk about dyslexia, I'm talking about an abnormal difficulty in reading. And you'll hear us use the word phonology quite a bit today. This is the smallest sound units in Word, and this is the letter-sound correspondence. So when the teachers teach, this is what they're teaching, is this letter-sound correspondence. Orthography is the writing convention, so it's all of these rules. And there are so many rules that we don't even know that we know about writing, but they exist, and somebody has written them down somewhere, and this is all orthography. So when you capitalize something, when you use a period or a comma, when you choose different pronouns, and all of this is orthography. I guess I'll just do. Okay, we had planned to kind of do like this dialogue, but it's a little bit far. So then you'll hear them talk about structured literacy. This is not I'm not an educator, so this is not kind of my world, but you'll hear the educators talk about structured literacy and that it's an explicit, systematic, and sequential teaching of literacy at multiple levels. And then I'm hoping this works. This is an example of a student reading who has dyslexia, just so you can see how profoundly difficult it is. Oh, it's not coming up. Okay. It's really eye-opening. Yeah, we've had to move this from multiple computers. So this is the current kind of understanding of dyslexia, that it's neurobiological in its origin, and it can be described by difficulties with fluent or accurate word recognition and poor spelling or decoding. So decoding is phonologically stepping through a word and using those as the markers to build the word together. This is in the context of preserved cognitive abilities. So dyslexia is not related to intelligence. You can have dyslexia at all levels of intelligence. And it's in the context of adequate instruction and exposure to language. And I think that's something that will come up a lot today when we're talking about different types of learners, is if you haven't learned English from a very young age and then you're expected in kindergarten or first grade to start reading in English, that's really hard. And how that varies student by student. The main symptom that's seen in dyslexia is difficulties with this phonological processing, so the sound units in the words. And the other two classic symptoms are rapid automatized naming, difficulties with rapid automatized naming, so not being able to quickly retrieve words from your lexicon, and auditory short-term memory. Auditory short-term memory is this buffer that we have in our minds. For example, if someone tells you their phone number, you repeat it in your mind until it goes into your long-term memory. And that's our short-term memory, is that kind of buffer or that echo that we have in our minds. You may notice that a lot of kids don't get diagnosed with dyslexia. And there's a variety of reasons for that. One of them is that the actual term in the diagnostic manual for clinicians is specific learning disorder with reading impairment. And then there's also mathematics impairment and writing impairment as well. And let's see here. Another reason is that different definitions of dyslexia exist, and this affects the prevalence and how we estimate the prevalence. It varies widely from 1.5% to 20%. Some people only consider dyslexia if there's a phonological impairment. In that case, the estimate's going to be on the lower side. Some people are more inclusive in their definition, and they consider it to be any reading impairment. And in that case, it's going to be on the higher end. It also depends on what age you measure dyslexia. So there's a lower prevalence in adults than in children. It depends on what language you're testing them in. So English is a non-transparent language. You may have noticed that the letters don't always sound the same, and sometimes they trick you. They look like they should sound one way, but they don't. But that's not the case in all languages. For example, Italian is very transparent. Every letter has one phoneme, and it's very consistent. In that case, the prevalence of dyslexia is lower, and dyslexia looks different in those languages. And then we talked about the definition. Someone mentioned earlier all of these components, and one thing that happens is we'll get kids coming to our clinic that have a variety of diagnoses. They might come to us with auditory processing disorder, or ADHD, or anxiety or depression, and it really depends on what lens you're looking at, what was first noticed in this kid that routes them through an assessment process. So for example, if a child is struggling with attention, they might go see their pediatrician, and their pediatrician might diagnose ADHD. And then that kind of might be the end of it. And if they continue to struggle in school, they might not receive more assessment trying to figure out, well, what is underlying this? And so at our Dyslexia Research Center, we like to do a really deep dive that looks across cognitive domains to get a full picture of this. And I do want to mention the co-occurrence with math. There's a high co-occurrence of math difficulties in dyslexia and vice versa. And I forgot to mention in my history slide that those first pictographs in like 4000 BC were actually for accounting purposes. So reading and math have been coupled together from the beginning, and in our brain, the regions that underlie math and reading are right next to each other. They're like siblings, and so these co-occur, and there's a biological and historical reason for it. Our assessments look across domains, and the reason this is important is related to what Dr. Miller was talking about with phenotypes. One of the earlier presenters talked about this group to individual difficulty, and I think this happens in clinical work as well. When you were trying to bring research that we do on a population level into the clinic, and we're meeting face-to-face with one person, how do we help this one person? And one of the ways to do that is to reduce this kind of large population into more granular subtypes that have a biological basis, so that you know that you're not just kind of going off of something that doesn't have a lot of science behind it. And so the testing here that I'm showing you is from 3 different students that were diagnosed with dyslexia. Can you see my mouse? Okay, great. And this first column here is like an intelligence estimate. They're all highly intelligent, but you can see their patterns differ across different domains. This particular student in red only struggles with working memory. Working memory is that short-term buffer that I told you about, plus a manipulation. So when you say, okay, here's my phone number, and now I want you to say it in the backwards order, you have to change that information. And we do this a lot, actually. Most of the time, our brain does a process on whatever information we receive. We send it to long-term memory. We think about a response that we want to formulate. These all happen in working memory. But this child excels with visual spatial abilities. And you can contrast this with it's kind of hard to tell, but this lighter gray where they have excellent short-term memory, but they struggle in visual spatial. And this matters because these kids learn differently. If someone is excelling at visual spatial, they're going to do really well with information that's presented visually, compared to somebody who doesn't do well with that information, is really confused by it.
Can I jump in for a minute, Christa?
Yeah, please do.
When I first learned of this, I've been a special education teacher for about 25 years, working with students with dyslexia, over 400 students with dyslexia. And when I first learned this, that all of their processing is different. They're not dyslexic because of a phonological deficit, but because of all this, and working in the field of special education for all that time, not knowing it, right? Working with students, teaching reading, not understanding the cognitive functions involved. Once I realized this, it was so enlightening to me to realize, oh, this is why what I'm doing works for some students better than others, because they're all coming at this intervention with different functioning in their brains. And so this was just really just unbelievably eye-opening to me only a number of years ago after having been in the field for so long. And so that is what's so exciting about this chart, is realizing that not all students with dyslexia function the same, and that's why the intervention has to change, and that's why this learning can inform the instruction in the classroom for all students. So this slide is so important to really look at.
Thanks, Jodi.
Yeah.
So currently, as Dr. Miller mentioned, we're formalizing about 6 different phenotypes. This is data from our center, and it shows kind of the prevalence of our phenotypes within our cohort. And executive functioning is currently the one that we see the most, and this is often confused with ADHD. It can co-occur with ADHD, but it's not only ADHD. And these suggest that there could be different interventions that work better for different types of kids with dyslexia. And just as another example from the Memory and Aging Center, the phenotyping that Dr. Gorno Timpini did in language variants really led to the discovery that they needed a different type of treatment, because the patients that she saw had Alzheimer's disease compared to the other 2 types of variants that had frontotemporal dementia. It's a different treatment. And that's what we're thinking for dyslexia as well, that these different phenotypes actually probably need different approaches. Some of our work focuses on things that we see as strengths in dyslexia. We think this is equally important. And we had a paper recently that looked at emotional sensitivity in dyslexia, and we found that the children with dyslexia were more reactive. They had more sensitivity to emotional stimuli, and we saw this in their facial behavior, in their skin conducts, a physiological response to emotion stimuli, and in their respiration rate. And I think you can imagine these little kids, in your classroom when they're like breathing, you can see them, you're like, oh, Nugget, you're getting nervous. You can see them doing this. And it relates to improved social skills. It also relates to increased anxiety and depression. And again, it's a 2 sides of the same coin. It's a benefit in one hand. They really understand emotions well, and they feel them. On the other hand, they might be overwhelmed with these emotions. And you can imagine how this relates to your work in the classroom. And you probably see this, that they're little social butterflies that kind of float around, but they might be prone to anxiety too. We really pride ourselves on taking our research to the real world. We don't want to just be in our research silo and like throwing papers into the ocean like one of the other presenters talked about. We care about helping people, and we've been super fortunate to have the backing of private donors that see the value and potential in this work in making this happen. And we're super grateful for that, for this partnership. So our goal is to take our research into clinical care, to work with educators to talk about interventions and to learn from educators as well, to improve technology and eventually change policy and justice. Yay! I agree.
All right, I think I'm up.
Yeah, you're up.
But you can jump in. Please jump in at any time. So, hi. This is a slide that I use in my teacher training program. And what I thought was really interesting about it is that it says barriers there. And so here we are, right? Breaking the barriers or connecting the silos. So here we have the reading scientists on one side, and in the lab studying cognitive functioning of the learning process. And then we have the reading educators on the other side, teaching the learners, like me, like I did for many years, not really understanding the why, right? Not understanding why of my methodology, with all of my training, with all of my credentials and all of my training, really not understanding the why, and then not being able to modify my instruction without that understanding. So it's so important for us to work together to connect. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in here because one of the things that's been really valuable for me as a researcher is to talk with Jodi when we're talking about kids, and she'll say, okay, but how does that look in the classroom? Like, that's interesting, but how does it look in the classroom? And at first I was really intimidated, and I just tried to use jargon and like, seem really smart. But that doesn't help the kids, right? Like, ultimately I wasn't achieving the goal that I was there to do. And so then when she said that, and she kept asking, and it really made me think, okay, what does it look like? What can we talk about here? And I think that's really when it became valuable to me, is when I started to think about, okay, don't just know, like help them do. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I wanted to mention here is in this slide, I think an important part is where's the student in this picture? I think the teachers do a great job of saying like, oh, this child's having trouble in my classroom, like, let's find out what's going on. But then they come to me and they don't know how to get back. And there's still, I think, a chasm in how we talk about this from like even clinical care or research into the classroom. I think there needs to be a bridge for families to navigate.
And we have a good example of that later in a slide about how we went back and forth trying to figure out what it looked like in the assessments and then what it looks like in the classroom. So I think we can bring that one up later. So Chartwell School, and Katrina mentioned Chartwell School. So we're a non-public school, which means that we're part of the public school system, as called a non-public school, which means that we can have students placed by their district with an IEP in our school. So we're not just a private school, we're part of the public school system, which we're proud of. And we serve students K through 12, and all of our students at Chartwell have a language-based learning difference, like dyslexia. And what I thought was really interesting about, I'm gonna go all the way back. Oh boy, here. Christa's slide here. Most, if not all, of the students at Chartwell not only have dyslexia, but have dyslexia and ADHD, dyslexia and on the spectrum, speech and language impairment. And so they're complicated students that we have at our school. And that's why they end up there, because the system that they were in they were not successful in the system that they were in, so they found us. So we hope to empower those students. And because all of our students have a language-based learning difference, it's really important for us as a major part of our program to teach structured literacy. And so structured literacy is language-based, it's diagnostic and prescriptive. So we're constantly assessing our students and prescribing what they need in terms of instruction. It's direct and explicit, and it's sequential and structured, it's multisensory, and it's cognitive. We explain the why to our students, so our teachers need to understand the why themselves in order to teach it to the students. And it's emotionally sound, and I believe that that's really important to many of the people, if not all of the people in this room, is that when the students feel successful,
they feel like they can do it and they make progress. So that's a really important component. So structured literacy is, I think what happens in many schools is teachers get excited about teaching reading and the reading comprehension and the talking about novels and the teaching the vocabulary, and that's the language comprehension piece. But what's really at the root and what needs to be more prominent, in my opinion, in elementary school teaching is that those foundational reading skills, which is a major component of structured literacy. So if you look at the bottom of this reading rope, Scarborough reading rope that maybe many of you have seen before, it's teaching, it's the learning of the phonological awareness, the decoding, sight word recognition. That's a part of skilled reading. And so that is a major focus of the structured literacy program at our school, and that what we've helped to implement in Lilia's school. So when we think about reading, the ladder of reading, all students, so most students need to learn how to read, and this goes back to what Christa was talking about it's not just an innate skill, you have to be taught to read. There are about 5% of children who just pick it up. And so maybe you know someone, a friend's child, a niece, a nephew, maybe your own kids, where you just read to them and all of a sudden they just started reading. Out of nowhere, they could do it, right? Maybe they memorized a lot of words, but they just are intuitive in the reading process. But that's only 5% of students. And 35% of students, they'll learn to read no matter what reading program you teach in school, right? They're gonna pick it up, but as long as they're taught. But 40 to 50% of students will not learn to read unless they are taught this structured literacy approach. They need to learn phonics, okay? And 10 to 15% need direct, explicit, intensive instruction in phonics skills, structured literacy, okay? Lilia, I'm gonna let you jump in because when I shared this slide with her staff, this really resonated with them.
This slide here was super huge for our staff in bringing them on board with just the direction in which we were headed. And all of a sudden, as soon as we got back to the site, what's your takeaway? What's your big aha? Well, they could, somebody said, I think all our students are dyslexic. But the greater message was our students are in that orange and red tier. A lot of our students are there. They need something different. And so we had a grand majority sitting in that piece there. And I thought, okay, I'm going to hold on to that because we're going somewhere with this.
Yes. So there's the buy-in, the teacher buy-in.
And I would just like to say also, when you think about the fact that you've got 30 to 50, maybe 60% of the kids that need something different, that need this instruction, and you look at how that correlates with the number of kids that aren't reading in third grade at proficiency, I think you can start to understand what gaps we need to fill.
Exactly. And we don't need to wait to third grade to find out that they're going to struggle, by the way.
Absolutely.
Okay, just needed to say that. Okay, so we have a partnership. We're a lab school for UCSF, and that's been really helpful in helping us at Chartwell to refine our teaching methodology and increase our effectiveness. And we bring this knowledge into our Teacher Training Institute, which is really important to us so that we can reach more students, more kids. So this partnership is iterative. We learn from UCSF Dyslexia Lab, and they learn from us. We work together. So the way that works is UCSF assesses our students. Our students' families sign up, and they go to UCSF, and the students go in an fMRI, and they do some cognitive tasks, some executive functioning games, and social emotional testing. And then the evaluators come to Chartwell, and they do more cognitive type testing at Chartwell, and it's a long process. And then the evaluators meet, they all meet to talk about the kids, and then they have a family conference. And that happens first in case there's any personal private information that the family doesn't want the school to know about. So they meet with the family, they share the findings, and then we have our teachers, our staff, meet with the family and UCSF staff, and we all talk together. And that's where the magic really happens. So what we talk about, for example, is we found that one student was really struggling in math, even in our school, right? Even with small intervention groups, still struggling. We found out from the assessments that this student had a severely impacted working memory, which Christa's talked about, right? That really is involved, say, in long division. Imagine all those steps and everything you have to hold. And so I think a teacher's go-to is, ooh, I'll show them visually, or I'll give them some manipulatives, or, right, I'll draw a picture. But then what we also found out about this student is that they had very, very poor visual skills or visual spatial skills. So that wasn't going to help. That has not, right? That's what we were trying. That's not helping. So then what we also found is strengths. The student's strengths had excellent semantic knowledge, remembered stories, could tell stories. So then what did we decide to do? Well, we're going to change their method, and we're going to teach math through stories and language as much as possible. So that's just one small example, and we worked with the family and the teachers, and we're all sharing examples and ideas, and it's really collaborative. So then what we do is we monitor the effectiveness at our school, right? We're small enough where we're able to say, okay, well, what kind of progress has the student made through assessment? And now that we're going to intervene in a different way, let's monitor progress and see if it's effective. And then again, we develop the common language and understandings. And that kind of comes into play on the next slide, which is, what else was kind of exciting was I'm tracking all of this information. I love spreadsheets, and I'm tracking all of this information and the students and their strengths and their interventions and progress, and which phenotype that UCSF has designated them to be in. And what I realized is, as I was thinking about one student in our school who just was not making progress, I said, I wonder what phenotype that student's in. So I look at my chart and I see what phenotype. Oh, I wonder who else is in that phenotype. And as I'm scrolling down, I'm thinking, oh, he's not making a lot of progress either. Oh, she's not either, right? They all fit into this same phenotype. Wow, okay. And so it was the executive phenotype. And so I said to Christa, okay, so executive functioning to me is this: time, materials, information. This is what it looks like in a classroom. Student is, late, unorganized, doesn't know where to put his papers, right? Can't organize information. Is that what you mean by executive? Because I don't think that that's what you mean. And so then Christa started to explain inhibition to me, and she's going to explain it to you because I'm not. And then I said, but what does that look like in reading? And that's when I'm pushing her. Reading a word, what does that look like? So I'll let her stand up and explain it.
Sure. What I was telling Jodi is that when a student's reading, sure, yeah, it feels like to us that you see the word and then you just read that word. But actually, what your brain does is it captures everything in a view, and then you have to inhibit the things that you don't want to pay attention to at that time, and you have to retrieve words from your lexicon. Remember, part of that dyslexia was this automatic retrieval, and you have to select which ones fit a certain criteria. And this can go wrong for many reasons. One is that you might not have the lexicon to pull from, so you don't know which words to kind of pull up. You might not have the working memory, as Jodi was talking about, to hold the sounds together and then form a word, or you might not inhibit the other words. And so one of the things that came up, as I was saying, one thing that we see with the executive phenotype is that they will often substitute or semantically substitute different words that have the same meaning. And so the teacher's saying, but they must have read it because, so for example, if the word is large and the student's reading, they'll say, and he was big. And you're like, well, you must have known that was large because you said big, and that's not what's printed there. And that is a retrieval problem. Yes, their brain automatically interpreted the context and what the word should be, but they didn't retrieve it and they weren't decoding based on what was in front of them. They were just selecting. And this was something I noticed in my stepson when I was teaching him to read. And he's kind of like this rough and tumble guy, hates reading, wants to be outside playing. I think someone was talking about get your hands in the dirt. That's him. And so whenever I was reading with him, I noticed he would always do this, like kind of guess whatever word it should be. And it made me think, you know what, that's not a bad strategy on his part, because he's probably going to get by, because if you test him on what he knew enough to at least make it seem like he read. And so I worked with this group at Ohio State to design this decision-making game. And basically what I was looking for is what strategy are kids with dyslexia using to play this game? This is not a reading game at all. This is really about this process underlying reading, a decision-making process. So basically in this game, you'll see there are a bunch of red fish and there's a yellow fish here. Every time the kid catches a red fish, they get 5 points. If they catch this yellow fish, they lose all of the points they've accumulated. And they can't control where their fishing line goes. It goes into random places, and I tell them all of this. And so then they have to decide, are they gonna fish and try to get more points, or are they gonna collect the points and try to just score out? And the kids with dyslexia earned the same amount of points as the kids without dyslexia, but they had a very different cognitive approach. They were much more likely to take risks, so we saw like greater points in some cases, and they were much less consistent in their play. And I think you'll also recognize this when you see their reading and writing. This is a student who was spelling number words, and in purple are the different ways that she spelled the word 100. You can see she never spells it the same way, and they're right next to each other in line. You can imagine, like, she could just look and see how she spelled it, but she doesn't. She just wings it every time. And this is 1,000.
Winging it.
Yeah, and so you can see this consistency is not there. They're not consistently applying a strategy, and that makes it hard to teach when you have this strategy you want to teach them, and then they're not consistently applying it.
Consistently applying it. That's exactly right. Exactly right. And then I'm not going to, I do want to make sure that I'm aware of time, but one of the ways to intervene is mindfulness training. And we did another study with UCSF, and they found that our students engaged in mindfulness activities, and there were certain cognitive tasks that I assumed after the mindfulness training that they would improve on, and the hypothesis is that they would also improve reading real words, and I didn't think that that one would hold true, but it did. They read real words better after the mindfulness training, and I think it's this slowing down and paying attention, right? The nonsense words, the non-word reading remained the same, but you have to slow down and pay attention to nonsense words because you have to decode it. You've never seen it before. You're not as likely to guess, right? But the real word reading improved. But that's another story for another time. So mindfulness training, important. Another reason why it's important in school. Okay. So our Teacher Training Institute, I'm going to kind of go quickly because I want to give time to Lilia to talk about the process. But we've had Chartwell teacher training at Chartwell for about 20 years, and it's at Chartwell, and teachers from all over come and train in a structured literacy methodology with us. And then the best part about it is they get to, there's a practicum, and this is different than any other, I think, program out there, is that they then observe our teachers teaching our structured literacy program, and then the teacher trainees get to implement the training with the students, the same lesson components. And then there's feedback from the Chartwell teachers. So that's a special part of our training. So a couple of Lilia's teachers came to Chartwell to take our structured literacy program, and went back and shared that they want to try. And so what Lilia decided was, you need to come to Hollister. Everyone needs this, right? We want to turnkey it, which we can do, but we want everyone on board. And this is where she was revolutionary, okay? And so what we did was her one PD day. I think she gets a year. We were just talking about that. I went to Hollister, so there I am at Hollister with all the elementary school teachers, and we did a neuroscience workshop on reading, and I began to overview structured literacy and lesson planning. And as I'm looking out there in the room, right, being a teacher for a million years, I realized they're not buying this. Like, what's happening, you know? And I said, I just stopped and I said, what's going on? Like, I'm sensing that that I feel like you're thinking that this is just something else. Here's another program that we're gonna institute, right? And which just reminded me very quickly of a teacher who just retired who learned new math. It was called new math. And he said, oh, I know this, we learned this 30 years ago. But anyway, they just cycle, right? So anyway, everyone felt like here's another thing. And so I said, what's hard about this? You know, what's the pushback here? Tell me. And I said, because you have administrators here who are willing to put in the work and the time and the materials. And that's what they wanted to hear. They said, that's what we want to hear. We're already doing this program and this program. When's it going to happen? How's it going to happen? Is there going to be more follow-up? And so we were able to get up, and Lilia and some other principals got up and spoke to that. So she'll speak to that a little bit more. But there has to be buy-in, right? So then what happened was after that training, a colleague and I went into classrooms, and there we are, demoing lessons for their teachers. They observed us, and then we debriefed with them so they could ask us questions about the teaching. And then we went back, and we keep going back, and we went back and we observed them, and they felt comfortable enough for us to observe them, and we provided feedback to their teachers, ongoing feedback. Okay, and so what I would love Lilia to do now is to talk about that process from her lens and how she was able to implement this literacy instruction in her classroom, because that's what we want to happen.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lilia Espinoza, and I am principal of our Hardin School. And we are a TK5 school in the Hollister School District. Anybody familiar with Hollister, where it is? Yes. Perfect. Usually everybody's like, the store? Yeah, the T-shirts? Not there. No, we are a beautiful community in San Bernardino County, and within that community, we have this beautiful school that I am so very proud to. I was an alumni. I went there when I was in 5th grade, and I actually got to know this school because my dad was the custodian at this school. And so on Fridays, we got that treat of being able to go into the school and clean the chalkboards, because at the time we had chalkboards. And I got to pretend to play teacher and all of that. And then I'd clean the chalkboard and then run to the next classroom and do the same thing over and over again. Never, ever did I think. I knew I was going to be a teacher. I knew that for sure. But never, ever did it even cross my mind to someday be a principal. But this school needed something different. And I was able to go and visit Chartwell and kind of see what they were doing. And at the time, you know, you're kind of getting poked in the ribs and saying, come on, go, they need a principal there, go do this. And I started to see there was something different. And I knew if I'm gonna go in there, I've got to do something different. And so when I saw that there was this opportunity, I applied, and actually during my interview thing, I took in my student cumulative file, you know, the one where you have all the pictures and all that. That was kind of my opening, like, here's my cumulative file. See that? That's R.O. Hardin, that's me, and this is where I belong, because I think I can do something different. And Jodi, I'm like, help me, we've got to do something. I told them I'd do something different, come, let's do this. But we went along with a group. At the time, they provided me with a team that would be able to help us in this mission to do something different, right?
So we decided we're going to go to Chartwell, we're going to go through their teacher training program, and we're going to go do this. And this team was also new to the school. So here we go into this training, and we thought, this is great. First thing we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and assess every single student and see what we need to do. Sure enough, upon assessing 487 students, we realized we can't do it with just these 4 reading specialists. We needed everybody on board. So we turned to Jodi and we're like, hey, we need everybody on board. And so this is where we invited Chartwell to come and help us through our professional development. And again, it had to be something that was supported, and it was ongoing, and reassure our staff that it wasn't going to go away. So our population, we serve 63% of our students are English learners. So not only do we have students who have literacy needs, but we also have students who have language needs. And so we needed to make sure that we're taking care of all of those pieces as well. Not just that, but we have a high socioeconomic challenge at our school, a lot of students with trauma. And so we also knew we needed to take care of that part of our student. And so here I'm walking into a historically underperforming school in our district. And so we pretty much knew that when we looked at the scores for our school, we always have known RO Hardin will be dead last. And we have not had data since I've been there. I mean, I've been there 3 years, and we haven't yet taken our state assessments. We've been through the 2 years of pandemic chaos, and so I am taking this as our baseline year. We're going to really see where we are here and continue to grow from here. So this was the fall of 2019 where we're taking off in partnership with Chartwell, and our journey began in putting together a structured literacy program for our school. And like we explained, not everybody was like, yep, let's go ahead and change things up, because as you all know, change is hard. And when you've been teaching for 20, 30 years, and you're telling me to change how I teach reading, that's hard to take. And so we just said, we're gonna go for it. We've got students that need this, and working off of the chart that, like I said earlier, Jodi had presented this chart, and everybody was like, oh, we've got lots of dyslexic students at our school. And we don't. Maybe there's a few here and there, but we have students that needed structured literacy. And so we took off in 2019-20. We had a beautiful program serving every student from kindergarten to 5th grade, because yes, we had lots of 5th graders reading at kinder and 1st grade level. And so we were able to provide for those students as well. Then 2020-21 came, and the end of 2020, we went into the pandemic, and although we did face the challenges that the rest of the nation, the rest of the world faced, we had to get creative as to how do we still reach our students? How do we still provide that structured literacy that students need? And I was very fortunate during that time. What does a principal do when, everybody's online? And Google, somebody said Google's a supporter. We were on Google Meet, not Zoom, by the way. So we did, I was able to provide the structured literacy. I took on a reading group. So I had my little group of 6 students, and I think the team gave me 6 students because they're like, well, she's the principal, they're gonna listen to her. And they kind of did, but they still, you know, had their backs to me, or they wouldn't mute. And anyway, we still have the challenges of reading instruction in a virtual manner, right? One of, here you see a picture, kind of a blurry picture, and this was during, and it's a car, and you see a field off there to the right of that car. One of the students in my group, Yasmin, she, you know, I could tell she wasn't at home. I never knew where she was going to be, whether she was going to be in the closet, or she was going to be fighting with her cousins, or if she was going to be in the kitchen eating a burrito. Whatever it was, but this time Yasmin was in a car, and I said, Yasmin, why are you in the car? And she said, oh, I came to work with my mom. And I said, you're at work with your mom? You're in the car, you know, I'm thinking, Mom, where's Mom? And she said, yeah, you want to see? So then she turned her computer so that I could see her learning environment there. So when we talk about barriers and things that we deal with in education, it's what our students are having to overcome and the resilience that they push through in order to achieve. And I am so, so very proud. Yasmin, of course, even so, where, you know, you didn't know where she was going to be learning from one day to another, still, of course, when we came back onto campus then in late April, I'm like, oh, I lost my group, because then, of course, I had to do the real principal job of walking around and, I don't know, yard duty. So my group went to another one of the reading teachers, and we were able to see, okay, where is she now? I wanted to make sure that, okay, did I just totally mess this up? And no, I was fortunate that I didn't mess things up. Everybody made progress. So we were so very, very happy to see that all of our students, even through pandemic, on Google Meet, were able to have success in their reading instruction. So then we came back to the classroom, right? And even so, we had all these rules around us of you can't mix students, and you know, keep your mask on, and all of those things that were so important to students' safety and their well-being, right? And so you see here, in this picture, you see our intervention specialist in the back. We've got a volunteer. We weren't supposed to have volunteers, but we snuck her in. She's a former principal, good friend of mine, that I just said, hey, can you come help us out? Don't tell anyone. So we were able to do that, and during this time, we were able to continue to provide still 100% of our students receiving reading instruction at their reading level. So if I'm in 5th grade, I'm not expected to be reading at a 5th grade level when I cannot access a 1st grade reading. And it's not my fault. It's not that I couldn't learn to read, it's I was not given the proper program to learn to read. But the students can. They can do it. So of course, a lot of this has had to be with restructuring schedules, right? Changing things around and making sure that everybody is on board with this. So with all of this, we had to, in current year here, we have a PE teacher who is part of this structured literacy rotation. We've got, this time when we did K-5, we had 4 literacy specialists, and every single teacher on board, it's all hands on deck, and instructional assistants that all are on board. Everybody's got a group. This is what's when everybody's on board, you've got, here's a group of 3 students with 1 specialist. And then back there, you see Mrs. Little there with 2 students. So when you've got that many staff members and all of these people moving around, you're able to provide small group targeted instruction. So that's, and we're able to provide it for an hour. So our little ones are kindergartners, they can't handle an hour. We go about 35 minutes with them, and that's kind of pushing it. Nonetheless, we see results with it. Present day instruction. I told you we started with 4 in 2021-22, so current school year. We're probably the only district that is having a little budget crisis at the moment that we are working hard to get through. And I am so hoping that I do not lose what we have right now. But with the budget constraints that we are facing in our district, we did have to go from 4 specialists to 2 specialists. Nonetheless, all of our teachers are trained, so we're confident with the team that's there. And we are able to provide literacy instruction to all of our students in kinder through 3rd grade. That doesn't mean that our 4th and 5th grade don't need it. We just don't have the manpower right now for it. So, of course, we've continued to jump through all of the continued interruptions, everything that Omicron brought our way. We did have classroom shutdowns in our district. Everything that I think the rest of the world has faced in the last 2 years, we've also been on that train. But our literacy instruction and that time has been protected. I think I spent just about every single day in January subbing. And our literacy, our specialists were always coming in like, do I have to sub today? And I told them, listen, if I pull you, it's because I'm in, our assistant principal's in, and I've got nobody else. Then I will pull you, and we will. So there was one day where we were down 5 teachers, no subs, and everybody, come on in. We need to get this in. So there were only 2 days that we had to say, all right, let's cancel for today and let's get this done. And then 2 weeks in January, because they finally told me, you're mixing students, and we're having to shut down so many classes, and because you've got all these reading groups going on. And so, yes, I had to cut it there for about 2 weeks and adjust our groupings in order not to mix students and do all of that piece. But why is this so important to us, to our school, and a school, like I said, with many needs, such as language, right? And a huge one for our staff from the moment I stepped on was trauma. Our students have so many needs in just their lives. And just, one example here, we've got a little girl that just started with us in January, whose mom passed away in December. So the dad calls me and says, I need my daughter to start school as soon as possible. Her mom passed away in December. She's been out of school since then, and I need her to start school. And being that I too had lost my mom just a few months prior, I thought, oh my God, this kid must be distraught. I knew how I felt, and I knew what I was feeling going through all of these emotions. This, absolutely. And we've got a counselor on site, which we were first year that we've ever had a counselor, and I love it. But again, our budget constraints, and we might lose. So this was a huge piece for us that I said, let's get her on. And the dad said, okay, so can we get her in there? Absolutely, let's get her in there. And I thought, all right. And I thought I'd be seeing this like grieving child and I thought, well, she's not crying. Well, trauma looks different for every child. While I couldn't keep a dry eye for months, and I'm talking to her and trying to connect with her, like, hey, yeah, I lost my mom too. And no, she just wasn't budging, and I thought, this is more than what I can do. This isn't, it's not my area, it's not my specialty. So I thought back to an article that I brought forward to my staff a couple of years ago when we're getting going and talking about what our students need, right? And one of their big things and something that they're such huge advocates for, they love them, they love our students, our staff cares deeply for our students and they advocate for them. And one thing that they really wanted was they wanted a counselor. They wanted somebody that take care of the student needs as far as their social emotional needs. And I came across an article that I brought to a staff meeting. And it's an article written by Dr. Stephen Dykstra. I don't know if I said that right, and you probably all know him a little. He's probably here, just kidding. Anyway, he's a psychologist, and he wrote an article, Trauma and Reading. And I brought that article to our staff, and I said, let's just read this. Let's take it in. And let's, what are our ahas? What are we taking away from it? Basically, we can love, we can nurture, we can understand, we can listen, we can give students space in order to help take care of their SEL needs. But one thing that we know for sure we can do is teach a student to read. And this article really talks to that point of how reading helps a student come out of trauma. So I recommend you take a look at that article, and it really is a beautiful piece. And of course I'm like, well, what if they don't learn to read? And there's, of course, then I saw you're not gonna have a control group of students that you're not gonna teach to read, and that makes sense, right? So it is a school-wide effort for us to take care of the whole child. So here's our data. So our special ed referrals back in 17-18, we had a total of 21 students who were referred to special ed to receive special ed services, and of those 21, 15 qualified. In 18-19, we had 29 students referred and 20 qualified. In 19-20, we started our structured literacy program where we could be solid with knowing whether a student was able to be supported with learning through a structured literacy program. And so we had there 11 referrals, 7 of them qualified. And then in 2021, 7 referred, 6 qualified. This is current. Of course, we are in the IEP, month here. But so far in March, we had 3 referred, 3 that qualified for special education. Now, that's what having a structured literacy program has offered us, a more solid base of knowing whether our students are in dire need of extra support, or if we can take care of that with our Tier 1 instruction. Here's a little more data that you can take a look at, and really, basically what's happening, our students are making progress. They really are making progress in reading, and we're able to see that. And so they own their learning, they master the concepts, Historically, we'd go on vacation, we'd go on spring break, and we'd come back and be like, what happened? They're still on break. Or we'd go on summer vacation, and the the first grade teachers would be upset with the kinder teachers. They didn't teach them anything. Or the third grade teacher would be like, how did this kid make it to third grade this whole time when doesn't know how to read? So we had lots of, hurt feelings back and forth with, you're not doing your job type of thing. Now we know, and what we've been able to build is we know where the student is, we know where the student holes are, and we know what we're building from. So that's what that's been able to offer us. One of our teachers shared with us that a student said to her, Mrs. Garcia, why didn't my other teachers teach me like this? And the student's finally feeling success, right? She's finally learning to read, and she's like, I got this. How come nobody else did this for me? And it's really powerful for the teacher to feel that. Recently, I was doing an evaluation for one of our instructional assistants who is part of our literacy program. And as I'm sitting there, and any questions, any feedback for us, anything that we can do different or help to support you. And she had just started in October, so she hasn't even she's done some coaching, side-by-side observation, and she says, I can't believe I'm teaching kids to read. This is so cool. So it really is rewarding to be able to see just all of that come from students in what we're able to offer. This is other data. Again, like I've said, historically, our school has been lowest performing. And so here, we're able just to see a tiny glimmer of, all right, we're headed in the right direction. In the fall, this current school year, 70% of our students in 3rd through 5th grade were in need of reading intervention. And now in our winter scores, it showed 62% of our students were needing reading intervention. That was a decrease of 8% of our students needing reading intervention. We have, like I said, we've got 10 schools in our district, and we are one of 2 schools that actually made growth this school year. So I'm like, all right, we're moving in the right direction. So absolutely proud of just the growth that we've made and the really the work of fantastic staff. We also, I don't know how Jodi does it, but she says, hey, there's this UCSF thing, they're wanting to do this screener thing, and what do you think? I'm thinking that your school would be great for it. And I think she just sees sucker right here, because that's how she got me to do this too. She's like, hey, so, but you know what? It's been such a beautiful partnership. Their brains are fabulous. So to be able to be around this energy here and learn from them and really get them to come to our site and continue to work with our students to provide for our students and some insight on next steps is so very valuable to me and to our teachers and ultimately to our students. So that is my piece there, and then it gets back into the science stuff, which, not me.
We can just actually do it in like 2 seconds.
right.
Yeah.
Hi.
We're going to race through this so you guys can ask some questions.
Yes, this is just to give you a glimpse into the screener. This is funded by the state of California to bring a free screening to all kindergartners and first graders in the state of California. And this is meant to assess their risk for learning disorders. And it's being validated currently across the state of California. And as Lilia mentioned, our RO Hardin is one of the schools that they're using in this validation phase. So this is more to come. You'll hear about this more in future years.
I just want to add that, and then we'll allow questions, but first of all, I did tell her she could say no, but I knew she'd say yes. This screener, early reading screener, they implemented it in Lilia's school for all kinder and first graders, and we did already learn some information about what the students, their strengths were and where they really had needs. And so what we've already started to talk about is how we're going to refine the instruction for the current kindergartners to implement more phonological awareness activities and skills, because it's needed in addition to the structured literacy program that's already being implemented. So it really can provide more information for targeted instruction. So we're really excited about that.